The sun rises over the fields of Cannae, burning through the morning haze. 80,000 Roman soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, shields gleaming, banners snapping in the wind. They believe this will be the day they crush their enemy, a foreign general who's dared to humiliate Rome again and again. But across the plain, Hannibal watches in silence. His men are outnumbered 2-1. His back is to the river, and yet he's smiling, because the Romans are walking straight into his trap, a trap so perfect it will become the most devastating defeat in Rome's history. By sunset, the greatest army on earth will be gone, swallowed by its own pride. The story of Cannae begins years before that fatal morning. Rome and Carthage, two superpowers locked in a struggle for dominance, had already fought once and Rome had won. But one man refused to accept defeat. His name was Hannibal Barca, son of a Carthaginian general who made him swear as a child eternal hatred for Rome. To fulfill that oath, Hannibal did the impossible. He led an army, and even elephants, across the icy Alps, losing half his men but shocking the world when he emerged on the other side, deep inside Italy. For 2 years he outsmarted Roman legions again and again. But Rome's pride only grew. The Senate gathered the largest army in its history, nearly 90,000 men, determined to end Hannibal once and for all. They marched south to the plains near a small town called Cannae, believing sheer numbers would crush the invader. But Hannibal knew exactly what they would do. Every step of their advance played into his design. He had chosen the battlefield, the time, and the wind. The Romans thought they were coming to destroy him. In truth, they were marching into a masterpiece of death. Dawn broke quietly over the plain. The wind was dry, carrying dust that clung to armor and sweat. Hannibal's army stood in a crescent formation, his weakest troops, the Iberians and Gauls, positioned in the center, their spears trembling slightly as the Roman wall began to advance. Behind them, his African veterans waited, silent and still like coiled snakes. Hannibal rode along the line, his calm presence cutting through fear. He had drilled this moment into their minds. Retreat, bend, but never break. Across the field, the Roman legions thundered forward in perfect unison. 8 ranks deep, unstoppable, confident. Their commanders sneered at the thinner Carthaginian line. Dust rose around them like a storm cloud, hiding what Hannibal truly intended. From the hills, his cavalry began to move, a slow, deliberate shift to the flanks. No one noticed. All eyes were on the center, where the Carthaginian line began to collapse, exactly as Hannibal had planned. The Romans believed victory was already theirs. They didn't realize that every step forward was tightening a noose they would never escape. The Roman advance was unstoppable, shield locked to shield. They moved like a single organism, an iron wave rolling forward with the roar of 80,000 voices. The Carthaginian line in the center buckled under the weight. Gauls stumbled, Iberians fell back, and Roman blades plunged through gaps in their ranks. The legionaries cheered. Victory felt inevitable. The enemy was breaking, just as they had predicted. But Hannibal had seen this before. He knew the arrogance of the Roman charge, their hunger for a frontal victory, their need to crush. He allowed it. Every step they took, every fallen Carthaginian drew them further into his design. The crescent of his line folded inward, slowly forming a bowl. The Romans, eager for the kill, kept pressing forward, crowding tighter and tighter into the trap. Then the moment came. On the left flank, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry, wild horsemen from North Africa, darted across the field. Their movements were chaotic, unpredictable, clouds of dust swirling beneath their mounts. The Roman cavalry, commanded by Consul Polus, charged to meet them. Swords flashed, horses screamed, and the battle dissolved into a frenzy. But the Numidians did not fight to win. They fought to distract. Every moment they kept the Roman horse occupied was another moment Hannibal needed. On the opposite flank, the Carthaginian heavy cavalry, led by Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, met the Roman right. Unlike the Numidians, these men fought with brutal precision. They smashed into the Roman riders with the full momentum of armored warhorses. Within minutes, the Roman right flank collapsed. Bodies fell into the river. Hasdrubal wasted no time. He wheeled his men around and thundered across the rear of the battlefield. The Numidians, seeing the signal, broke off their feigned retreat and joined the charge. The Roman cavalry was gone. The entire battlefield was now sealed from behind. Still, the legions in the center fought on, unaware of their fate. Their line had driven deep into Hannibal's formation, so far that they could no longer see the rear. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, swords raised high, pushing against what they thought was a retreating enemy. But Hannibal's center had not collapsed. It had curved. The bow was drawn tight, and now the string was about to snap. From both sides, the African infantry surged forward, the veterans who had waited in silence all morning. Bronze and iron crashed together as the Romans suddenly found their flanks under attack. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Orders were shouted, but no one could move. The formation that had once been Rome's strength, tight, disciplined, impenetrable, became its coffin. There was no room to turn, no space to swing a sword. Hannibal rode to the center of the line, watching the shape of his trap complete itself, a perfect encirclement. Dust and screams filled the air as his cavalry closed in from behind, sealing the ring. The Romans were surrounded, 80,000 men trapped in a circle less than a kilometer wide. The killing began in earnest. At first, the Romans fought desperately. The outer ranks slashed outward, hacking at the Carthaginians closing in from every direction. But there was no escape. Those in the middle could do nothing but listen to the sounds of dying men, the crash of shields, the panic spreading like fire. The crush became unbearable. Soldiers couldn't breathe, couldn't move, crushed by the weight of their comrades pressing forward in blind terror. Some suffocated where they stood before an enemy blade even reached them. As the sun climbed higher, the battlefield turned into a furnace. The air shimmered with heat, the dust thick as smoke. Blood pooled beneath fallen bodies, mixing with mud and sweat. The once proud Roman banners lay trampled underfoot. Officers shouted themselves hoarse, trying to restore order, but no one could hear. The sound was beyond human, an ocean of agony and chaos. Hannibal's men fought with ruthless efficiency. The Gauls and Iberians, who had once pretended to break, now surged forward again, joining the circle of death. They had lost friends that morning. Now they took their vengeance. The African veterans cut through the Roman ranks with practiced precision, their curved blades flashing in the sunlight. Hannibal's cavalry dismounted and joined the slaughter, tightening the noose inch by inch. From a nearby hill, the Carthaginian officers watched in awe. Never before had such a maneuver been executed on this scale, not in all of history. It was not just victory, it was annihilation. The Roman army, the greatest force the Republic had ever fielded, was being erased before their eyes. Hours passed. The fighting did not end, it collapsed. The Roman formation broke down entirely. Not from retreat, but from suffocation. Men fell where they stood, their armor crushing them under piles of corpses. Others tried to flee toward the river, only to be cut down by cavalry waiting at the banks. By mid-afternoon, the battlefield was silent save for the cries of the wounded and the cawing of circling birds. When the sun began to fall, the extent of the horror became clear. Nearly 80,000 Romans lay dead or dying. Only a few thousand escaped. Entire legions had ceased to exist. The plain of Cannae, once golden with grain, was now red with blood. Hannibal dismounted and walked among the fallen, silent, grim, his victory complete. His officers approached, cheering his genius. Some urged him to march on Rome immediately, to end the war in one final strike. But Hannibal looked out across the carnage, the mountains of bodies, the stillness after so much death, and said nothing. He had achieved the impossible, but at a terrible cost. His army, though victorious, was exhausted, their supplies low, and Rome's heart was still beating behind its walls. In the Roman camp far to the north, word of the disaster arrived slowly, then all at once. Senators wept in public. Mothers tore their hair in the streets. 1 in every 3 men who had marched to Cannae would never return. The Republic itself seemed ready to collapse. For a moment the world believed Rome was finished, but in that silence something inside Rome hardened. They forbade mourning in public. Grief was replaced with fury. The Senate swore that the Republic would rise again. They would rebuild their armies no matter how many generations it took. Hannibal had destroyed their legions, but he had also awakened something far more dangerous, Rome's relentless will to survive. As night fell over Cannae, Hannibal's campfires burned across the horizon. He had done what no general before him had ever done. He had annihilated the greatest army on earth in a single afternoon. Yet even he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. The field that had seen the death of 80,000 men would become a lesson whispered through centuries, the perfect battle, the perfect trap. And from its ashes, Rome would rise stronger, colder, and more determined than ever before. Because while Hannibal won the day, Rome would go on to win the world. And in the days after the battle, the plains of Cannae became a graveyard stretching beyond sight. Survivors wandered aimlessly among the dead, unable to comprehend the scale of what had happened. Entire legions had vanished. Fathers, sons, and brothers lay piled together in silence. The stench of decay hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder that even Rome's might could be broken. Hannibal's men built pyres for their own fallen, but there were too many Roman bodies to bury. The land itself became their tomb. In Rome, disbelief turned to horror. The Senate received reports so catastrophic that some believed them exaggerated, until the tattered survivors arrived. Public mourning swept the city, but grief quickly gave way to resolve. Temples filled with prayers, the streets with vows of vengeance. The Senate declared new levies, drafting men barely of age and even slaves willing to fight. Yet amid the despair, one figure stood out: Fabius Maximus, the delayer. His strategy of caution, once mocked as cowardice, became Rome's lifeline. He urged restraint, patience, and survival above pride. Rome would not give Hannibal another Cannae. The battlefield was lost, but the spirit of Rome endured. And from that silent, blood-soaked plain, the Republic began its slow march back from the edge of extinction. Not through triumph, but through endurance. Cannae was not just a battle. It was a reminder of how quickly order turns to chaos, how swiftly certainty collapses into dust. Hannibal's name would echo through the centuries, not merely for what he destroyed, but for what he revealed and the fragility beneath all greatness. His victory was flawless yet fleeting. Rome's fall that day was absolute, yet its recovery unstoppable. Between those two truths lies the essence of history. Nothing lasts except the will to endure. Empires, armies, ambitions, all meet their Cannae eventually. But survival belongs to those who can face ruin without surrendering to it. So as you think of that field, of men who believed themselves invincible until the earth swallowed them whole, ask yourself this: when the world turns against you, when every plan collapses, do you break under the weight of failure, or learn, adapt, and rise again?